What if I told you that Oscar Piastri's accident at the Brazilian GP was not simply a mistake in the wet, but the trigger for one of the biggest internal dramas at McLaren in years? What if you found out that his own teammate, Lando Norris, could have been indirectly responsible? What if I told you that Piastri's own engineer confessed it? And what seemed like just another sprint race at Interlagos ended up being the epicenter of a storm in Woking. Oscar arrived at Interlagos hungry for victory. His season up until then had been stellar, consistent, mature, and meticulously calculated. The Australian had shown that he was no longer simply the promising youngster, but a serious contender for the world title. Lando Norris, his teammate, led the overall championship standings, but the gap between them was short enough that any incident, a race, a corner, a mistake had the potential to change the course of the title. The tension was real, and deep in the paddock they knew it. Since Friday, conditions on the Brazilian circuit had been unstable. The asphalt, traditionally technical and treacherous, showed patches of moisture that remained intact even when the majority of the route was already dry. During grid formation, predictions called for moderate chances of rain, forcing all teams to make key decisions about tire pressures, suspension settings, and downforce strategies. McLaren, true to its methodical style, opted for a configuration that favored speed in medium traction and corner exit, which in Interlagos could make a key difference in the Cova do Sol and braking towards Decided do Lago. The sprint started at a frenetic pace. From the first corners, Piastri maintained control and positioned himself behind Lando Norris, who was leading the race after an impeccable start. Sandwiched between them was the young talent from Mercedes, Kimi Antonelli, an actor who should not be underestimated. But despite the closeness of the leading group, everything indicated that Piastri had the necessary control to fight for the podium or even for the victory. However, it all fell apart on lap 6. In a fraction of a second, when the Australian took the exit of turn 3, one of the most delicate sections of the circuit, just where the car goes from a slight climb to a rapid descent towards the DRS zone, he lost control of his car. There was no prior notice. There was no progressive slippage. It was a total loss of grip on the rear axle. The car spun violently on itself, and although Piastri reacted with impressive reflexes, there was no way to avoid the wall. The blow was sharp, brutal. The impact sensors marked a critical deceleration. Medical teams responded immediately, although fortunately the pilot was unharmed. But what was left on the track was not just scattered carbon fiber. It was a tangible symbol of broken opportunity. The 6 points that were almost in his pocket, invaluable in the context of such a close fight for the championship, evaporated in seconds. The most disconcerting thing came later. Just moments after the Piastri accident, 2 more incidents occurred in the same sector. Nico Hülkenberg and Franco Colapinto, who were behind, suffered almost identical spins, hitting the same outer barriers. What seemed like an isolated error began to take on a disturbing pattern. Was it just a coincidence? A gust of wind? A sudden puddle? No. The perfect repetition of the 3 incidents raised immediate suspicions both in the transmissions and in the pits. There was something else. Something that telemetry data, onboard cameras, and the engineer's intuition were slowly beginning to reveal. What initially looked like an unfortunate accident but explainable by the slippery conditions at Interlagos, quickly transformed into one of the most tense and revealing situations of the entire 2025 season. In the paddock, the teams began to review in detail the telemetry data, the onboard cameras, and, above all, the radio communications. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together in a way that no one expected, and what was found was as explosive as it was unexpected. Oscar Piastri did not lose the car simply due to his own mistake. There was a trigger, and that trigger came from the box next door. The first clear clue emerged from Mercedes. Kimi Antonelli, the young Italian driver who was among the McLarens at the time of the incident, reported something unusual in real time on the radio. Norris touched the curb and a lot of water came out onto the track. This phrase, which initially may have seemed like a simple comment on the conditions of the circuit, became the key to unearthing a sequence of events that would completely change the narrative of the race and unleash an internal gale at McLaren. Onboard cameras confirmed the suspicion. A couple of corners before Piastri's accident, Norris had run slightly wide into turn 3, placing the right rear tire on the outside curb. This curb, still wet from an earlier light rain, contained water trapped in its grooves. When pressed, the tire of Norris's McLaren released a small but critical amount of fluid towards the ideal line. That water, under normal conditions, would not have had a major impact. But Interlagos does not forgive. The combination of that added moisture, The cold temperature of the asphalt and the medium tire compound chosen by McLaren created a surface so slippery that it turned the exit of the corner into an invisible trap. When Oscar Piastri reached that same point just seconds later, he encountered a treacherous surface. The rear axle grip disappeared instantly. The reaction was immediate but useless. Not even the most experienced drivers could have avoided the spin. The car went sideways without warning, as if someone had turned off the traction with a switch. It was not a miscalculation. It was not excessive aggressiveness. It was simply being in the wrong place, right after his partner had upset him without apparent intention. That's when Tom Stallard, Oscar Piastri's career engineer, came into the picture. A key character in the evolution of the Australian driver, Stallard is known for his technical precision and strategic vision. It didn't take him long to identify the sequence in the data. The loss of grip was not consistent with the typical behavior of the car. It was not a question of excessive speed, nor of entering a curve that was too open. What the sensors showed was an instantaneous loss of traction with no transition phase. To any experienced engineer, that was a sign of a contaminated surface. And the only new variable between Piastri and the drivers who had passed through that point before was Norris. The fact that 3 cars, Piastri, Hülkenberg and Colapinto, ended up in the same barrier after hitting exactly the same spot was not statistically insignificant. It was an alert, an anomaly that required a technical explanation. And the only one that fit the data was the one that Antonelli had stated without knowing it. Norris had taken the water from the curb, and that water had changed everything. The atmosphere inside McLaren became dense. Stallard knew what he had on his hands, but the dilemma was monumental. Did you share it publicly? Was he letting it pass as a technical misfortune? Was he hiding it from Piastri to avoid an internal emotional breakdown? In that context, the most symbolic moment of the day arrived. At the press conference after the sprint, with Lando Norris sitting on the podium next to George Russell, the Mercedes driver could not avoid the comment that would mark the day. It was a bit like in Mario Kart when you throw a banana behind you. The phrase caused some laughter among journalists, but behind that irony an uncomfortable truth was hidden. Norris, perhaps unintentionally, had created a track condition that eliminated his own teammate and direct rival for the title. Beyond the anecdote, the effect was tangible. Lando extended his lead in the championship to 9 points over Piastri. A difference that, in the context of such a tight season, could define a title. And he did so in the midst of a controversy that left McLaren in a tremendously delicate emotional and political situation. Because in Formula One, being fast is not enough. You also have to survive the implications of every curve, every mistake, and every drop of water. George Russell's comment wasn't just a joke. It was a direct blow to the internal confidence of the Papaya team. Comparing Norris to a Mario Kart player who sets up traps for his rivals was a calculated provocation. And it had the desired effect. Social media exploded. International media began to speculate about a possible fracture within McLaren. The fairness of treatment was questioned. It was questioned whether the team had favoritism for Norris, who has been its main driver for years. At this point, the silence of Andrea, Stella, team leader, was deafening. No official statement. No clarification. Not even a standard phrase to calm the waters. This lack of response generated more uncertainty. Because in Formula One, when a team is silent, the noise is made by the outside world. And then the real question arises, how do you rebuild trust after something like this? How do you explain to a driver who is fighting for his first title that he has been eliminated due to an accidental action by his teammate? How do you manage internally an incident that, although not deliberate, directly favored one of the two in dispute? In a season as unpredictable as 2025, where the distances between McLaren, Ferrari, Mercedes, and Red Bull have shortened alarmingly, any psychological advantage, any internal friction, can have consequences of catastrophic proportions. And if McLaren fails to channel this incident as collective learning, if they do not reinforce the emotional structure of the team, then they not only risk losing a title, they risk losing one of their most promising talents. Lando Norris, with more experience, must now decide how to respond. Not with public statements, but with actions. He will have to show, on and off the track, that the team is as much a priority as the championship. Piastri, for his part, will have to face the most difficult challenge of any young driver in the elite. Pull himself together, stay focused, and continue believing in a project that for a moment seemed to turn its back on him. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.